Well, we do have some rather rare stadium news regarding the Washington Commanders, the team that, honestly, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would they have a new stadium by now? I would say yes, but the ownership issues with Dan Snyder completely halted any potential new stadium. All of the renderings that have been shown for the Commanders' new stadium at this point are all completely out of date. There have been no new renderings released on a potential new Commanders stadium since the ownership change. However, we do have some news here. House passes bill transferring control of RFK Stadium site to DC, enabling possible Commanders redevelopment. And what an area that is, right by the river. RFK Stadium in the process right now of being demolished. Will this potentially happen? It sure looks like it will be a legitimate option for the Commanders' new stadium. The House overwhelmingly passed legislation allowing the DC city government to redevelop the RFK Memorial Stadium as a possible location for the Commanders football team. A bipartisan legislation would permit construction of a stadium and additional housing while preserving at least 30% for parklands. It comes as the city is reckoning with the possible loss of two professional sports teams, the Wizards and the Capitals, possibly both going to Virginia, and that is a complete mess as well. Let me tell you, when it comes to the District of Columbia, the stadium slash arena situation is not good. I guess the Nationals with Nationals Park, that's not terrible. I always consider Nationals Park a very average stadium, but it's certainly not the bad state that Capital One Arena is in, the location it's in for the Capitals and the Wizards. And by the way, there's big issues with them possibly moving to Virginia. A lot of people pushing back against that potential around $2 billion development. But of course, you would expect that it still might happen. It's not just going to happen overnight. We'll see. And then the big development for DC and the surrounding area could be a new Commander Stadium at the RFK site, which, again, beautiful location, and they would still preserve some parklands, which I think would be an amazing idea if you're talking about around that stadium. Maybe you develop a little bit of it. You're going to need some parking, but you don't want to make it a parking lot desert. Maybe you put a little district there with a few buildings built up, but then you've got all of those parklands surrounding the stadium. I think that would look really cool. This is a stadium I would expect to be a dome, but that is just speculation based off of their previous plans and just how stadiums are going in general, with many teams building domes outside of the Buffalo Bills. And this is significant because there's always been the thought that they could build the new stadium at the RFK site. It makes sense. It was a good site. There's a reason it's had a stadium already. There has also been talk about building a stadium in Northern Virginia, along with maybe Maryland as well. I'm sure some people saw the recent news on FedEx Field, or I actually don't think it's called FedEx Field anymore. The name is being changed. Whatever it's going to be called, getting a renovation around $75 million. Their suites are getting upgraded. You might wonder, why would they be planning a new stadium if they're dumping money on the current existing one? This is just Commanders ownership realizing this new stadium is not coming anytime soon, and FedEx Field is so decrepit that they're going to have to upkeep it in some form. So that's why they're spending, less than $100 million. Truth be told, if they really wanted to stay at FedEx Field for the next 20 years, about $1 billion would need to be dumped into that stadium to save it. Probably even more. You would have to change up so much stuff. You'd have to remove the supports off of the upper deck and completely rebuild it, and probably open up one of the sides of the upper deck completely. So they're not planning on staying at FedEx Field for long. They're just doing that little dinky renovation as a byproduct of the horrible ownership situation, when in reality, the Commanders should already at this point possibly be moved into a new stadium, or at least have a stadium ready for next year or the year after, if the ownership situation wasn't so bad with Dan Snyder over the last decade. Dan Snyder and that ownership tried to develop a stadium plan, but there were always issues because nobody really knew if Dan Snyder was actually going to be there to implement and build this new stadium. So I would say the RFK site is definitely a 1A option for the Commanders. There was an original idea on some just recreational fields, soccer fields by the looks of it from the renderings, that was put out, and a bunch of stories were done about them possibly redeveloping this RFK site into just a mixed-use commercial area for the public. But that was back in 2018. As things have evolved with RFK Stadium just sitting there, seemingly things possibly could change. It's not a lock that they're going to have their new stadium at this site, but at least with this new news coming out, it could make it legitimately possible, the idea of developing a stadium. And then around the stadium, you've got the rivers and you've got the nice kind of woods, parkland area that would make for a very nice ambiance going to a game. There was also an article I was able to find from August of 2022 talking about 3 potential stadium sites, all located in Virginia. This site in Sterling, Virginia, sits in the busiest of 3 commercial areas off of Old Ox Road, just minutes from an airport. This is another site, Woodbridge, Virginia, getting a stadium development sitting next to an existing neighborhood. And then you also do have Dumfries, Virginia, as another possible option. They've certainly talked about Northern Virginia extensively. This article coming out about 2 months ago in January, Virginia General Assembly has focused discussions on a proposed massive stadium campus for the Wizards and the Capitals. This would be a $2 billion development, and this development will likely put any discussions around a new stadium for the Commanders on the back burner, which could be another little clue that they might pick the former RFK Stadium site as their new stadium, because Virginia is focused on this other development with getting 2 possible pro sports teams, the Wizards and the Capitals, if they do end up getting that arena. I would expect this to move along at a decent pace because at this point, FedEx Field by far is the worst stadium in the NFL, even with their little renovation and upkeep that they're trying to do for it. I'd expect big news within the next, I don't know, maybe this summer. Maybe this summer something comes out. I don't know if early renderings would come out this early. I'm sure they're going to be shopping around. They do have many different options, but this is like a redo of what Dan Schneider and that ownership was already doing, talking about the RFK site, talking mainly to the people in Virginia, possibly going there, trying to leverage the 2 against each other, but seems like they might be out on the whole idea of Virginia, because it seems like Virginia is focused on both the NBA and the NHL, possibly getting teams from there. And this stadium, which will very likely be around a $2.5 billion development, because they're going to want to host Super Bowls. We saw the previous renderings. It was a dome. That's just speculation. I don't know. Maybe this new ownership with Josh Harris, maybe they do want to go traditional with an open stadium. Seems very unlikely at this point that any type of fully open stadium will be built in the NFL. Even the Buffalo Bills have an overhang, kind of like a European soccer stadium. It's not too pronounced, but it's there. So I would expect for sure a dome stadium to be built for the Washington Commanders, which some type of translucent roof. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of natural light. The only thing, will it be retractable? Is it worth it? I think it actually would be worth it. That area, whether it's Landover, Maryland, whether it's the District of Columbia, whether it's Northern Virginia, they get really good weather in September and October for football. So I don't know, but we know how it is with retractable roofs. Anytime it's, a little bit too cold, if it's 62 degrees, they'll close the roof. I would also expect, here's a little extra thing, a team to the south of them, the Carolina Panthers, to really kick up some stadium conversation. Their stadium, Bank of America, is just terrible, and I don't think it can get a renovation. There's no point to it. So they're either going to be talking about a massive renovation or a new stadium themselves. Probably this summer, that would be my expectation. It's going to be a lot of Commanders talk with a new stadium, some Browns talk, although that's still early in that development. The Bears, it's going to be a huge summer for the Bears in their new stadium, and also the development with the Jaguars getting that funded, as well as maybe a dark horse, the Panthers. Not a lot of people talking about them, but their situation is going to come to a head soon enough. Either way, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.